Hello, and welcome to the Holistic Fitness Podcast, where you'll learn how to get your goals without burning out. I'm your host, Laurie, and this show isn't just about movement and nutrition. You probably already know that exercise and nutrition is important for your mental and physical health and well-being. It's also about stress management, mindset, shedding those limiting beliefs, and some of your childhood trauma while you're at it. Today, I'm super excited to speak with James O'Hara. James is a nurse practitioner with a passion for evidence-based individualized medicine. He utilized an integrative approach that combines lifestyle interventions, supplementation, and medications when indicated to empower patients to feel better, live longer, healthier lives. How are you going tonight, James?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on.
I am so excited to have you on. I've been following you on the socials for about a month now, and I just love some of the stuff that you post. And I love that you're bringing that integrative approach to medicine. So super excited to have you here. Just let everyone know here tonight, I feel like whenever you get into some sort of, integrative medicine or alternative stuff or fitness or nutrition or whatever it is, it's for a specific reason. There's been a trigger for you to go on that path to want to help people in this very specific way. So how'd you get into what you're doing today?
Yeah, so my journey into healthcare and medicine actually started right out of high school. I went into a nursing program where I got my associate degree in nursing, which is what you know as an RN. Probably most people that listeners are familiar with have an RN degree, and they usually work in the hospital. And that was the path that I took. And I had a lot of really good instructors, a lot of good teachers, mentors. And I think that really helped me to excel in that. And even backing up, I guess, before that. So actually, my first start in medicine is when I broke a lot of bones growing up. So I was on the patient side at that time. And one of those experiences was really profound for me. I developed a complication after a fracture called compartment syndrome. And for the listeners, this is a swelling of the tissue in a muscle compartment, is as it's called. And when that happens, you have pressure that gets put on the muscle, pressure that gets put on the nerve and the arteries, and you lose blood flow, cause nerve damage, lose muscular function if it's not corrected. So the hallmark symptom is excruciating pain. Fortunately, I had a very good mother who was aware that this was going on, got me into a hospital, and I had a very good surgeon who performed the surgery called a fasciotomy, where they essentially make an incision into the skin of the muscle called the fascia, and it relieves that pressure and the blood flow is restored. The nerve is not being compressed anymore. And very fortunately, I don't have any sequelae or negative consequences of that to this day, aside from some scars that remind me I was very lucky. So that's my real first start. And after coming out of nursing school, I was a perfect fit for orthopedics, given that I broke probably 7 or 8 bones growing up. And it wasn't so much like fixing fractures in the hospital. Most of that stuff is done outpatient. It was mostly joint replacements, and those are still being done very often. And what I really liked about that was that people came in and they had this sense of hope. So if someone has like degenerative changes in their joints, they have arthritis, that pain is getting worse and worse every day, every year, very slowly. And then when they come in and they're having this procedure, they've been, really excited. They've been doing their pre-surgery exercises. They want to have a great outcome. And they realize that there's going to be pain after surgery. But many patients tell me, when they come out of the anesthesia and they're walking around on their new joint, that there's pain, but it's a different pain. And that's because they know that it's going to get a little bit better each day instead of continuing to get worse. So that's one of the concepts that I try to inspire in all the patients that I talk to even now, is just to inspire hope. Because I believe mindset is a very underrated tool for optimizing somebody's health, just like you alluded to in your podcast intro. So that's probably the first half of it, and just some of the concepts that I think have started me in this direction.
Wow. How do you, for the listeners that maybe aren't in America, nurse practitioner isn't a super known term in Australia, at least for me, but essentially a nurse practitioner is like a step up from a nurse, and that y'all can give medications but like a kind of, not a doctor, like a doctor's like a whole different medication. Am I right? Am I right there, James?
Yeah, that's correct. So I worked as a nurse for a while, as the track typically goes. individuals work many thousands of hours as nurses before if they decide to go on to a nurse practitioner program. So I'm not a physician. I do a lot of the same things, order a lot of the same tests, prescribe the same medications that a physician would, but I'll never be doing surgery on somebody or, more specific things like colonoscopies or things like that are specifically for physician roles. And my degree is considered a family nurse practitioner. So I see, I can see all age ranges, although right now I have my practice just with adult patients. And what really inspired me to go from, being just an RN in the hospital, fast forward a few years, I'd been in a float pool position. Basically, you go to every unit of the hospital, whatever unit is short-staffed, they don't have enough help there. So I like that. People were typically very happy to see me because they were not short-staffed or less short-staffed whenever I showed up. And you get good at a lot of different things. You get exposed to a lot of different disease states, mental health, cardiovascular disease, kidney issues, diabetes, all these sorts of things. And you become really well-rounded, or at least I feel like that's how it worked for me. But then I landed long-term on the cardiac unit because I got really familiar with it, really enjoyed it. And seeing all the consequences there, like people having strokes and heart attacks and open heart surgeries, those things. And there was some point where it all clicked and I was realizing, these things are like 80 to 90% preventable. And that's backed up by the data on the CDC website with just how big of an impact our lifestyles have on cardiovascular disease, talking specifically about plaque buildup in the arteries. So that was really like empowering for me to know that there's things that I can do to prevent these things later in my life. And then knowing that I could go back, further my education, and also empower other people in the same exact way.
I love that. So it's a very, very much like healthcare industry, medicine, and very much like what I would call reactive healthcare is like what you would initially be doing. But then obviously you've seen all these preventative things. And something I observed, I was a health writer at the start of the pandemic. And I know one of the early stage studies done on one of the hospitals of the top risk factors of, I don't even know if I should approach this topic, but of everything that happened in 2020, one of the top risk factors in the early stage studies was obesity. It was like number 3. It was over 70 years old, then it was over 60 years old, then it was obesity. But obesity wasn't really being reported on in the mainstream media until 2021. So I'm really curious, well, from what I observed anyway, I'm really curious on your perspective of how you balance being in such a medical field where everything needs to be quantifiable with the preventative health aspects of good nutrition, good mindset, good sleep, and good fitness. How do you kind of balance that?
Yeah, I mean, there is going to be objective data for many things, most things in medicine. And sometimes those measures are better than others. There are tests that are more sensitive. There are tests that are more specific. If we're looking at just somebody's weight in general, what's commonly used there is the body mass index, which is an okay test. It's not going to be great for everyone. A couple of examples would be if I have someone who is, let's say, 65 years old, they have a normal BMI, but they have a very low amount of muscle mass. They're going to show up as a healthy BMI when I know that that person is really more leaning towards sarcopenia, which is just a medical term for not enough muscle mass or kind of wasting away, and is at risk for falls, frailty, fractures, and all those sorts of things. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you can have someone with a really significant amount of lean body mass. Think of like a power lifter or a bodybuilder, and they will not necessarily have the sequelae of being overweight or obesity if they are also metabolically healthy with that amount of lean mass. So it's not a very specific test, but it kind of gets you in the ballpark. And if I'm looking at the general population in the United States, I think it's like 70% of people are at least overweight now with a BMI of over 25. So, there is this sort of movement where there's like, health at any size. And I think that could be misleading for some people. I think it is reasonable to say that you can improve your health at any size. But the sort of illusion that, regardless of what your BMI is, that you can be healthy, it doesn't align with the objective data. And if you dig deep enough, you'll see, most likely insulin resistance. That's probably the easiest thing to define on blood work in these individuals who may have other markers that would indicate they're healthy, they don't have high blood pressure, but more than likely they're still going to have insulin resistance happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the specific study I looked at was a BMI higher than 40, which obviously is quite high. But I love that you broke that down of there could be older people that have sarcopenia, or there could be people who lift a lot that obviously on the scales seem very obese when they're not. I'm really curious to break down like how things are tested. So I saw this interesting thing recently. I'm not sure if it's true, but that most of the intermittent fasting studies have been done on men. Can you talk more about the representation of women in studies in general?
Yeah, and that's a great point. This is something that historically, even if you go back to not even human studies, but animal studies, that female mice are underrepresented because they have their hormone fluctuations, and it just messes up all the data, is what the researchers would tell you. And probably to some degree, that's the same reason that they've been excluded from studies in humans, just because there's more variables at play. On many levels, women are more complex, which makes discussing the hormones even more fun, in my opinion. But yeah, historically they have been underrepresented. An example that I give, just talking about sexual health, if you look at Viagra, which was a wonder drug for men when it came out, it was only about 5,000 men that were enrolled there, and before it got the FDA approval. And at this point, there are over 8,000 women that have been studied up to 2 years on testosterone, usually testosterone creams for improving libido, with good data to support its use. And there's still not been an FDA approval there. So you can kind of see examples of this all the way going back from the animal models to human studies. And even when there are human studies, you don't see them carrying the same weight. And I think the tide is starting to change there. They're also, adding in more female, rodents into the preclinical models, from what I understand. They're starting to kind of equalize those, but it hasn't quite caught up yet. But I am optimistic about the direction it's heading.
Yeah, you raise a really great point there, because I've heard also that the 9-to-5 work week is based off like the male hormone cycle, and I totally feel that. And apparently, women are meant to have a 28-day hormone cycle, because some days I'm crazy productive, and then the days leading up to my period, I just want to chill. Like, I just want to relax. So do you feel as though women are being overlooked in traditional medicine because it's harder to quantify our hormones?
Possibly. It's an interesting question, and it may not just be the quote unquote sex hormones. Women actually have more testosterone. Most women have more testosterone in their bodies than they do estradiol, which is not a well-known fact, but it is a fact there. When you get into things like, menopause, or if someone has a very low testosterone production, that can be different. But as far as when you look at thyroid disorders, or any autoimmune condition, is going to be more common in women. So like screening in traditional medicine for thyroid disorders is very rarely done. And when it is done, it's usually just a TSH. So these people can have what's called secondary hypothyroidism, or an underactive thyroid where the TSH is normal. And that's not the majority of cases, but it is a case that is going to slip through the cracks. And we're looking at something like a 15% lifetime occurrence rate, prevalence of a woman developing hypothyroidism. Actually, that's for the general population. It's going to be even a little bit higher for women, especially women whose mother or grandmother had a thyroid problem, or women who have autoimmune conditions that run in their family. All those things are going to increase the potential for this happening. And of course, age is going to be one of the strongest risk factors for something like that developing. But yeah, I don't know exactly how to turn the tide to where this movement and research translates into like more testing being done, because there is some resistance to what traditional medicine would call over testing. And there could be good arguments for and against this. Some people will say, well, if you have a test and it's a false positive, then that creates unnecessary worry and stress. And other people will say that, having that health data is the most important thing, And, everyone should have access to that. And I lean a little bit more towards empowering people with data, but it also depends on the individual patient. So some people want to know, some people don't. If you look at the strongest genetic risk factors for Alzheimer's, group of genes titled ApoE, not everybody wants to know that. Some people just want to live their lives, continue on, and not have that in the back of their mind, not have any anxiety around it because, what would they change anyway? They're already eating healthy, already exercising, those sorts of things. So it depends on the person, and we really take an individualized approach.
Yeah, that's awesome. How do you balance data? Because data is not always available, for specific groups, and experimentation with your clients. So do you ever, are your recommendations always based on data, or do sometimes you try things out?
Yeah, so if I'm starting someone on a supplement or a medication, I, always have human data. The one exception there may be, there are some supplements that have been used for hundreds of years or thousands of years in traditional herbal medicine. And those sorts of things have, I guess, their own data sets, although it's just anecdotal. And then there are no exceptions. So, there are people who, there isn't specific data for this, but things that make sense from a, mechanistic standpoint. So, an example, this may be a female that we have established who has low testosterone, and maybe this is in menopause, so it's not an issue of anything secondary. The ovaries have just essentially failed. The theca cells are no longer making testosterone, and in that woman, maybe she is prone to hair loss, for example. Although there's not great data on injectable testosterone for women, it has been studied. And the cream is going to create more DHT, which is the hormone responsible for male pattern baldness. Also causes hair loss in females that are sensitive to it, because you have more of that enzyme that converts testosterone to DHT in the skin. So although there's not great data on the testosterone injections, I don't have 8,000 women that have been studied with that. I do have 8,000 women that have been studied on testosterone cream. And I know that I can put the blood level with a pretty good degree of accuracy exactly where it needs to be, start very low, and then avoid some of that DHT conversion without having to add in an additional medication like a DHT blocker, like a finasteride or a dutasteride. So that's an example of when you might deviate from evidence and guidelines. But in general, you have large populations to look at and draw your treatment plans and build things out stepwise from that.
I love that, a data-driven, individualized approach. Talk to me more about the testosterone. So something I've observed in women, I work with a lot of women in the fitness industry, generally going through weight loss. And testosterone and that menopause kind of stage, I do observe it being more difficult for people to lose weight and build muscle mass. But I am curious about your thoughts on how you help people navigate that change as testosterone lowers so that they can increase their lean, or skeletal muscle mass.
Yeah. And actually talking about, menopause and perimenopause is a discussion that women can have at any age. Like they may go to their primary healthcare providers here and they'll be like, well, you're 25 years old. Why are you thinking about this? But you want to have a plan in place so that you can be, proactive and kind of know what approach you're going to be taking. The average age is 51. So, 51 is not the time to have that first conversation. Just like if you, plan on retiring at a certain age, you want to plan for that beforehand. So women on average will have about 10 or 15 pounds that they put on. And they're going to lose some lean body mass and add some body fat mass. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So progesterone is thought to increase the temperature a bit. So women have a lower temperature. They're no longer getting that progesterone spike in the second half of the menstrual cycle. They're going to be burning fewer calories. So that's a small effect. The estradiol levels are going to essentially, fall off of a cliff. They go from an average of about 100 to 150 down to very close to zero in most cases. And that causes insulin resistance. And that term gets thrown around a little bit. So to kind of unpack that, the main thing that I'm concerned about with insulin resistance is, that tends to be inflammatory. You're going to be less able to shuttle glucose or sugar into the muscles and stored as glycogen. And instead, those sugars are going to convert to fatty acids and be stored as body fat. To what degree of that effect? It's hard to say exactly, but it's just another small effect. And then you have the drop in testosterone. And that is going to lead to a decrease in lean body mass. And the decrease in lean body mass secondary to lower testosterone, lower estradiol, is probably the biggest lever in terms of I changed nothing and I gained 10 pounds because I believe that you're burning less fuel now because you have less lean body mass. So we have to correct that balance, put on that 10 pounds of lean body mass again, and you're going to be burning about the same number of calories. And another thing is, like I said, the thyroid, that's going to increase with age. So much more likely to have a thyroid problem at 55 than you were at 25. So there's a lot of factors and a lot of those things. And you can measure all of those in blood work and then track them as you build out your plan to correct those things.
What sort of things, let's just say somebody hasn't planned for their retirement, so to speak. They're 51, they come to you, you've done all the blood work, they're going through menopause. What does that plan of action look like? Like, what are the foundations to preventative health at that stage?
Yeah, so looking at what they have done up to this point in terms of, cardiovascular disease being, largely preventable, because at 51, most people are not going to be super high risk for having a heart attack or having a cancer. But, have they been a lifelong smoker since they were 16 years old? In that case, that person needs to be screened for, lung cancers and other cancers if they have the resources to do so. Has that person had any sort of imaging of the arteries that supply blood to their heart? Because if they, have been, not planning and burning through their health, burning through their money up to this point, then, we need to make sure that they don't have issues there. If they do, more than likely they will, then you want to initiate a plan, some medication to stop that buildup of plaque and stabilize it also. So those are a couple of things. As far as the, the hormones, you want to make sure that you have successfully navigated through the perimenopause and now you're on the other side, considered menopausal, because the estradiol levels can be wildly unpredictable during perimenopause. So a good way to, have an upset patient is starting them on estradiol and perimenopause, and then their estradiol level surges at the same time you're giving them more estradiol, and then they have, swollen, painful breasts, bloating, all sorts of things that make people unhappy. So once you're on the other side there, then you can have a discussion about risks and benefits, just like with any treatment, how it should be, because there are risks and there are benefits. And here recently, the United States Preventive Services Task Force published a recommendation against the use of hormone replacement therapy for primary prevention of cardiovascular disease and bone mineral density loss, osteoporosis. And it's really interesting because they're looking at estrogens and progestins that no one uses anymore. I shouldn't say no one uses because I'm sure there are people out there prescribing them, but people are not prescribing medroxyprogesterone or conjugated equine estrogens in large degrees. So the interpretation there should be, don't use these hormones for hormone replacement therapy because they do have significant risk of, increased risk of stroke, blood clots, and probably the medroxyprogesterone is the problem there. But if you use the bioidentical progesterone, just like women were formerly producing, and you use a transdermal form of estrogen, like a patch, and testosterone, if it's needed. I don't, have a cookie cutter approach where everyone gets the same exact thing. But testosterone, if it's needed, then you have a really good way to shift that balance back, improve quality of life, prevent bone mineral density loss, potentially maintain better cognition as you age, because, women all the time will talk about how they're forgetting things now. Yeah, they've gotten to menopause and I'm rereading the same page in the book over and over again. And it's really powerful when you can, safely improve somebody's quality of life to a large extent.
Hey, Holistic Fitness fam, a quick message from one of our sponsors, Ned. As you all know, I recommend good nutrition, movement, and stress management practices before supplementing, so you know what type of supplementation that your body actually needs. For me, I supplement with very few products, but Ned is one of them. I'm a type A, high energy, ambitious business girly with massive goals. And sometimes I honestly just need to chill out and relax a bit. I've found that both Ned's de-stress and sleep blends fit in with my busy lifestyle and ambitious goals, but I was honestly not a big fan of CBD products before trying Ned, mostly because of the culture surrounding weed. I just didn't want something that was going to alter my state of mind so that I became much less of a goal-getter or less ambitious. That was until I learned about full spectrum hemp and their benefits. Ned blends are chock full of premium CBD and a full spectrum hemp of active cannabinoids. Ned's full spectrum hemp oil nourishes the body's endocannabinoid system to offer functional support for stress, sleep, inflammation, and balance. These products are science-backed, nature-based solutions that offer an alternative to prescription and over-the-counter drugs. All of Ned's full spectrum hemp oil is extracted from USDA certified organic hemp plants grown by an independent farmer named Jonathan in Colorado. I'm obviously a big fan, but don't take just my word for it. Ned CBD products have over 2,000 five-star reviews, and they work with incredible partners in the medical field like Dr. Caroline Leaf, Dr. Christian Gonzalez, and Dr. Will Cole. Ned is providing Holistic Fitness podcast listeners a very special discount. If you'd like to give Ned a try, listeners get 15% off Ned products with the code Lori Lee, LORILEE. Thanks, Ned, for sponsoring the show and offering a natural remedy to bring balance to so many people's well-being. Something you mentioned earlier was herbal supplementation. What have you noticed when prescribing people with traditional, more medicine, Western medicine versus the herbal supplementation?
Yeah, it's interesting. I tend to favor lifestyle changes first. So if I have someone with, let's say your triglycerides are high because you're insulin resistant, then my inclination is not to say, well, you need to take more fish oil to bring those down. But, why are you, insulin resistant? So we're sort of getting to the root cause there. And a lot of times that's going to come down to the calorie balance, inactivity, those sorts of things. It's interesting looking at the perception of medications. The perception of some prescription medications like the statin class, which I don't believe are inherently good for everyone or evil for everyone. They're perceived to have a very high rate of side effects. And in some people, they do have serious side effects, but there are some interesting studies where they randomize people to a month of placebo pills, a month of the actual pill, a month of placebo. And the side effects are, unpredictable. And it appears to be driven by what we call a nocebo effect, where people will be more likely to report something. And they are truly experiencing it. It's not that these people are, making it up. But it's a phenomenon when certain medications get a negative reputation. Same thing when medications or supplements have a positive reputation. So supplements in general, even though they can have side effects, are perceived as having less side effects. So if I start someone on just pick a random supplement and a random medication, I would say that the person taking the supplement is less likely to experience side effects because there's less of a perception. There haven't been 50,000 people studied taking this supplement that reported nausea, heartburn, diarrhea, all the things that are rattled off at the end of these medication commercials. So it's a really interesting dichotomy there. But what you're trying to do is accomplish the same thing. There's a specific goal that you're trying to address or problem you're trying to resolve, and you're just using either a prescription or a supplement to get there. And it's just about using the right tool for the job.
For sure. I love that. And I love that you start with lifestyle first. Personally, I was on antidepressants when I was in my early 20s because I was depressed. Like I was having my quarter life crisis, other stuff going on. And I remember being so resistant to it. But the cool thing about medication, it helped get me from a 1 out of 10 to a 3 out of 10. So I could do the exercise. So I could do the things in my life that would help get me off antidepressants, and it wasn't a forever thing. I think like a lot of the people listening to the Holistic Fitness podcast, they know they need to exercise. They know that they need to have really great nutrition, but it's the mindset. It's the actually like executing on it because they've got so much stress in their lives. Do you have any clients that you work with that it's really the stress management side that they need to focus on? And what sort of advice do you give them?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of men that come to the clinic and they think they have a testosterone problem, and they really have a stress problem. So a quick way to test this is to think of, do you have issues with your libido whenever you are on vacation or you're off work, this and that? You have a babysitter. They're like, well, no. And then it's like, okay, so you only have this issue when you have these stressors going on and they're not adequately managed. And then, many times the testosterone level is, going to be in that upper 50th percentile, being very unlikely to be actually contributing to the symptom they're experiencing. And the SSRIs are a great example of, a medication that has a definite time and purpose, saved countless lives and help people to kind of dig out of that hole of depression. So if I have someone with like severe depression and I'm just like, oh, well, you just need to eat better and exercise, take some vitamin D, that person is either going to laugh or start crying because they know these things, but they literally do not have the energy to make those decisions. The way I think of this is like, think of the time that you were like the most, sick in your life with the flu or, whatever it happened to be, and how unmotivated you felt like to even get up and make a meal for yourself. And I try to empathize and put myself in these people's shoes and think, if I'm in that situation, there's no way that, I'm going to be checking all these, 10 lifestyle boxes and building myself out. But the medication can be a great lever. I think another example of this would be the GLP-1 agonists, medications that are coming out for weight loss. And these have gotten, very trendy. I think a lot of people are using them off-label. But for people who have dysregulation of this endogenous GLP-1, which is a peptide that people produce naturally that basically stimulates satiety, there is a phenotype. One of the 4 phenotypes of obesity is people who just do not feel full. So if I think of myself on, the lowest calorie intake I've ever been on, like if I'm trying to lose some weight or lose some body fat, that person could be even hungrier than me, even though they've eaten 3,000 calories. So it's not that they don't know that the pie that they ate or McDonald's is not the solution. It's that they are in a position where they can't seem to get a string of good days and good decisions going together. And I still have a bit of a theory that the medications can be used kind of like training wheels in either case to get people into good habits, and then potentially maintain that. Not for everybody. Certainly the obesity societies and endocrinologists, obesity medicine physicians would disagree with me there. But I think that could be a solution for some patients, but certainly not universal.
Well, antidepressants were certainly great training wheels for me. And even though I'm very much big on all the lifestyle factors and ideally, a medication not being for life, but of course that's a reality for some people. But I'm certainly not against it. I think that what you're doing in terms of blending the lifestyle side of things into medicine is a really beautiful thing. Something that I would really love to touch on are those lifestyle factors. So you mentioned lifestyle factors a while ago. So what are the number one foundations of health that everyone can apply for longevity, good cognition, all of that fun stuff?
Yeah, there was a really good paper on this that came out of Harvard probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And they had just identified 5 key factors, which I was really surprised by. But it was potentially adding about 10 years on average to someone's lifespan. And then, in concordance with that, you have an increase in health span. So you're healthier for longer as well. And I think it was about, 10 years for women, maybe a little bit less for men. But the 5 things are, not smoking, avoiding excess alcohol, eating a healthy diet, getting plenty of physical activity, and then maintaining a healthy body weight. So, it's not a super niche or unknown. Like, these are things that we all know we can do. And they're just very difficult in our society. So, not smoking, that's certainly getting much better. They have, medications and supplements now that can help people to, quit smoking. And I do want to make sure that people know that the nicotine itself isn't necessarily the most harmful portion of that. Nicotine can be addictive, but people will often kind of rationalize this like, well, I don't want to just trade one addiction for another because I'm using a nicotine patch or whatever it happens to be. Because I guess there is still some stigma around that, but by eliminating all of those carcinogens and the cigarette smoke that you're inhaling, you're going to be doing your lungs and your heart a world of good. Same thing with the alcohol use, and it's really interesting to see it's more in vogue now for people to not drink or to drink very lightly because they're like, hey, I think people come to a certain point in their life where they're like, I don't want to wake up and feel like that again, so I'm going to moderate myself. And as far as the used to be some health benefits of alcohol that were kind of circulating, and I think the research was a bit misconstrued there. What they had done was put patients that were formerly alcoholics in the never drinking group. And those people obviously have more health problems. So I think that confounded the data a bit. And any positive benefit from alcohol, in my mind, comes from the social engagement that you have during that time. So, a glass of wine plus socialization, I think it's really the socialization that is, doing the brunt of the work there. And then, if you have diet and exercise in place, then the body weight's going to also just line right up with that. So there's a lot of different dietary patterns that people can adhere to. It's not so much about chronically being on a diet, but finding what's sustainable for you. Because, you can write out a diet plan for anybody. It could be exactly the same as long as you are hitting the calorie balance, then you're going to have that person lose weight. The question is, do they want to eat those 6 or 10 foods every single day for the rest of their life? The answer is probably no. Now, because food is a very cultural thing. It's about social bonding. It's about enjoyment. And it's really about, balance. I mean, there's a couple of stories that have circulated in the news about people losing weights on these terrible diets. Like 10 years ago, I remember reading about the professor who went on a Twinkie diet to prove that he could lose weight eating Twinkies. And he lost weight eating Twinkies and his cholesterol got better and all these sorts of things. That's not the approach that I take for any of my patients. But it just shows how important the calorie balance is. And usually people need to default more to whole foods, so things that have much more volume than caloric density. So, thinking, like a salad is obviously going to be much more filling than a small piece of cheesecake, even though the cheesecake is going to have many more calories. So, if people are eating, things like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, not everybody does great with grains, but it's really all grains that are getting blamed for the problem that refined grains are causing. So looking at this initiative put forward, like Healthy People 2020 to 2025, see that 80 to 90% of people not eating enough fruits and vegetables, 80% of people not eating enough whole grains, 80% of people eating too many refined grains. So this is just, a case of, you're blaming the whole grains for what the Pop-Tarts and the Doritos caused, as opposed to like these foods that we know have more fiber and are more beneficial. So nobody's getting tricked by the Pop-Tart label that says it has 7 vitamins and minerals and thinking it's a health food. If people know these things, it's just about the palatability, the availability, and the convenience.
Definitely. So first off, totally agree with you on that whole grains comment that you made. Eating bread in Australia versus eating bread in America is an extremely different experience for me. I can have really fancy like sourdough from a bakery and stuff over here and be fine. If I go to like a takeout and have like a burrito, my tummy is just not okay. So feel you on that. But what I do really want to dive into is, you mentioned it twice with regards to food and alcohol, that social engagement, and that social engagement being a positive benefit. So when people are thinking about their health and well-being, can you share some environmental factors that are actually going to help people improve their mindset or improve their well-being in general?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the physical environment itself, nature is a really interesting one. So, whether you consider that part of the social environment or not, it does have a beneficial effect. And if you look at our society now, we have people that are clustered in urban environments. And from an evolutionary standpoint, we are really not getting any signs of reassurance that the environment is safe. So, you're walking down a street in a busy city, you're not hearing the birds singing, you're not hearing running water, all these sort of innate signs of safety. And when people do go out and spend time in nature, or even just listen to like bird song, going on a nature walk, it decreases their stress response. So it's a really important part of stress management to spend time in green spaces. And there's tons and tons of literature to back this up. And cities are leaning more into this now and putting in more green spaces. And then as far as the like socialization with other human beings, go on a nature walk together, of course, but there's going to be different levels to that for each person. Some people have zero burnout point for socialization. They could spend, every waking moment with another person. Other people, they socialize and they kind of get their dose that's right for them. And then they want to, have a little bit of their, alone time because that's part of their, stress management and decompression. So it's not a one size fits all, but it is important to have social connections so that you are not, isolated, because we see, the downside of this, the data in this, when people increase in age and they have a very small or a non-existent social circle, that their health and cognition and all these quality of life markers are going to decline as well.
Have you ever had somebody who has social anxiety come to you, and how do you recommend that they improve their social environment to help their health?
Yeah, there are a lot of people with social anxiety, and I hate to use the same analogy again, but the training wheels approach can work as well there with medications. It can work with just increasing the amount of time. So think of someone who has to give presentations for work, and it stresses them out. They are sitting there with their papers or their presentation. They're about to go up, and they feel their heart beating out of their chest. Palms are sweating, and that in turn triggers their mind to race, and it's just a feedback loop. A medication that sometimes gets headlines because a lot of celebrities, performers even use this, is propranolol. So that's a medication solution, and what it's going to do is slow that heart rate and blunt the sympathetic nervous response. So your fight or flight, you're giving a presentation, you're not running away from a tiger, as the fight or flight nervous response analogy goes. And that can help to blunt that. And then people spend time doing these things and not having their heart rate elevated and not feeling unwell. And then when they get used to it, they sort of desensitize and it becomes more normal. And maybe these people just keep these things on hand for as needed use. A natural alternative, because I do a combination of medication and supplements, would be theanine. And some people will even combine this with their coffee if they get jitters or anxiety from coffee. Energy drink companies will occasionally put it in energy drinks to kind of mellow it out, so people can drink more energy drinks and not get anxious from them. But the theanine can kind of calm that sympathetic nervous activity as well. So there's natural and medical alternatives specifically for social anxiety, but it really does come down to getting that repetition in at some point, and not progressively isolating yourself, because that's going to you're going to be slipping backwards there as opposed to making progress.
Yeah, I think that stress response is so important in so many ways. And I love that you help people with supplementation or medication there. Something that I've noticed that's pretty big on Instagram and TikTok at the moment is doing Pilates and what they call hot girl walks in place of weightlifting and HIIT. Because, obviously you do want to activate your sympathetic nervous system when you are lifting weights, because you want the blood flow to go to your large muscle groups. So do you have any thoughts or opinions on, doing Pilates, yoga and walking as opposed to more intense exercises when it comes to weight loss and stress management?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that anytime the question is there going to be some exercise or zero exercise? The answer is some. So, whatever people are willing to do. I've had patients sell their couch, you get an exercise bike, you put that in front of their TV. That's not for everybody, but it's certainly effective. For aerobic conditioning, I think that you can get a lot of progress from low intensity. Even, brisk walking, you're going to get the heart rate up. It's going to be good for circulation. But there are some distinct advantages to resistance training, and then also to doing some higher intensity aerobic work. So if you look at cognition being one of these things, this paper just came out maybe a week or two ago, looked at cycling on a stationary bike, and these people were doing something like an hour of low intensity versus just 6 minutes of intervals where they're really pushing the heart rate. So depending on your age, that may be aiming for a heart rate of 160 or 180 or even 190, somebody very young and very fit. And what they found was that you actually got more release of something called BDNF from the interval training. And BDNF is, sort of called fertilizer for the brain. It keeps neurons healthy. And this is also a mechanism that antidepressants seem to work by, is that they increase levels of BDNF. And it seems like it takes about 6 weeks for that to happen. And that's when people start to really experience that sort of lift. So another advantage of like high intensity versus the aerobic, like steady state, like jogging for an hour, riding a bike for an hour, relates to arterial flexibility. So the ability of your blood vessels to dilate and contract is going to be better augmented by some high intensity work. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time. So I don't want somebody doing all high intensity work because that's going to set them up for injury. So that's why if you look at even the guidelines from the American Heart Association is going to say there's a smaller time amount depending on the intensity of your exercise, because we don't want people actually overtraining. And the next thing you know, you've got an Achilles tendinopathy, and now you can't train. And what do you do now? And then I think the other part was about resistance training specifically. And I think that should be incorporated at least 2 days a week, 3 if you can. More is even better, just for preserving bone mineral density and lean body mass. The Pilates could have a positive effect on lean body mass, because when you are stretching muscle, that is still a stimulus for muscle, but it's not going to be applying a load to the bones to stimulate them, keeping the minerals in the bones and not having things like bone resorption happening where your body's pulling the calcium out and you're losing ground as you increase in age. So the resistance training is going to be light years ahead in terms of bone density.
Do people need to have a certain amount of weight to receive those benefits for resistance training? I'm thinking specifically of body weight training, and, doing body weight training personally for me for legs is very difficult for me to feel like I'm working. But with arms, push-ups on my toes really, really hurt. So basically, how heavy do people need to lift to get these benefits?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it goes down more to like what is challenging for that person. And starting from there, but then incorporating progression to where you are, like, let's say somebody can't even, do a squat. Well, they need to be able to do a body weight squat before they start, adding up the weights, or same thing with any sort of like a pressing movement or a pulling movement. So I do really like having people focus on those compound movements where they're going to hit a lot of different muscles at the same time, and that are going to be, somewhat functional. So it's about the balance, the coordination, and even if you're not using particularly heavy loads, you're going to improve your like muscular innervation. Your nervous system is going to become more efficient, and you're going to be less likely to fall, which is really, like if someone had a guarantee that they would never fall, then we would probably be less worried about bone density. But these things tend to correlate with one another and decline at the same time. So that's why we are kind of packaging them as a 2-in-1. If people want to know kind of where they're at on this spectrum of bone density, sometime between 30 and 40, your bone density is going to peak, and then you start losing ground after that, for both men and women. So depending on where your peak is, you can see like how aggressive you need to be, or if you're in a good place, looking forward even, something like 10, 20, 30 years if all things remain constant. And this is a lot of this is determined by your vitamin D receptor. But then there is a large degree of that that's modifiable by like how much exercise, resistance training somebody does early in their life leading up to that point.
Yeah, That's super interesting. So we're peaking between 30 and 40. That's fabulous. I've just turned 30. So I am stoked to hear that there's a peak.
That's right.
For bone density anyway. We're about to come to a close, James, and we do have a closing question. But before I ask you that, is there anything that you feel that you haven't shared on the podcast today that you really want to share with listeners?
Yeah, I think we got into a lot of great things. We talked about, women's hormones, men's hormones, things that I think are applicable for everybody. And just realizing that, the way that the environment is set up, that the algorithm is sort of programmed against people. The easiest thing to do is to go eat fast food, processed food, and then be sedentary, watch Netflix. So, it's important for people to, realize that, it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time. But you can, make small tweaks here and there, changes in your daily habits, and you can build towards better health. And regardless of what your starting state is, it's never too late to make improvements. So just, again, trying to inspire hope and let people know that there's always things that they can do to improve their health.
I love that. That's full circle from your story with those 8 broken bones, inspiring hope, all the way to inspiring hope, no matter where you are in your journey, to make any small tweak to get there. Now, we do have a final question. And that final question is, if you were speaking to your 20-year-old self right now, what advice would you give him?
That's a good question. I would probably say to start getting blood work just as a baseline. When I was 20 years old, even though I was working in a hospital at that time, I wasn't monitoring my health beyond like an annual physical. So unfortunately, I don't have any major red flags genetically for heart disease or things like that. But that would be several years of time gained had I had those risk factors that I would have been exposed to. So I think for myself, and then advice to other young people, getting a sort of a baseline where you're looking at just beyond the standard lipid panel, CBC and CMP, the basic blood work they get when they go to their doctor once a year, is a really good investment to make, because then you have this data, you can catch things if they're happening early, and the sooner you start working against whatever your genetics gave you or whatever health problem you have, then the more dividends that's going to pay as you increase in age.
Note to self: get blood work done. Wonderful.
Awesome.
I love that.
It.
James, where can people find you?
Yeah, so my main platform is probably Instagram. So I'm at James O'Hara NP. Our clinic website is GilletteHealth.com. So if people want to work with me directly or want to see what services we offer, they can check that out there. But I try to put out a lot of free to the public, high quality health information, topics that people are interested in. So if you're just following along for the reels or the posts, then I love that as well.
And I certainly love James's information as well. Specifically, there was a post recently on testosterone and lean muscle mass, which I found super interesting. Well, it's been wonderful to have you, James. Thanks for joining the podcast. Looking forward to following all your work. And for everyone listening at home or in the car, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and keep shining.